Hey everybody, I'm coming to you today to talk about pepper mills. Now, I'm not used to making pepper mills very often, so what I'd like to do when I go to make objects that I don't know how to make well or design well, I'll Google images of that particular item. And in this case, making a pepper mill, I would like to Google. Um, let's go ahead and share the screen here. I will Google um, images of pepper mills. And look what we got here, just hundreds and hundreds of images of pepper mills. I'm going to make myself a little larger there for this. So yeah, look at all these images. And looking at all these, they all have a lot in common. They're tall and thin. And in my mind, it's really difficult to create a nice shaped object and a tall, thin object. It's kind of like the shape of a 10-year-old boy. It's got no shape. It's just a stick figure. Anyway, my particular mills are going to have a little bit more body to them. So I have to uh, cut pieces of wood that will actually make well-shaped mills. Look at all these mills here again. And I would do the same thing. If you're not used to making table legs, um, finials. You can Google images of those and get some ideas on what you might like. I'm looking at all these again, going back to what these have in common. There's tall and thin. Look at this guy. This is not very pleasant at all to look at. Let's go ahead and highlight that. Um, a lot of poor design thoughts in there. Um, it is what it is. This guy over here has got so much color. It's pretty busy. Some people like that. I don't. Um, let's go ahead and look at some more. Anyway, go through all these, see what you like, and then make a reasonable facsimile of uh, of something you like. That's important. Now, the to make a mill of this size, you're going to have to dry a cylinder, and these are offcuts of my bowl business. And a cylinder of this size is is fairly hard to dry without a crack in it. And what I've done is I've rounded the edges over here, and that stabilizes the piece. If it's at a sharp angle like that, these areas would be tension areas, and they're really apt to crack. And you notice this little white powder that's on the cylinder? That's Ajax. That I actually throw these in a box when they're green, and I flood the box with a little bit of Ajax to keep the mold down. And then when I take them out of the box after they've hardened off for a few months, I wrap them up in heavy paper, and then they'll sit on a shelf for 6 months. And then eventually I'll break them out where they'll be open on a shelf. And you can see that I've also coated this with a green wood sealer. Well, that allows me to make an item that you just don't see every day. And in my mind, that's a pretty good looking mill. And it's very simple. Obviously, it's a beautiful wood. And anytime we make an heirloom of anything, you always have to go for the best timber. And how do you get the best timber? You go out and you get it yourself because it's really hard to buy things like that. So having a chainsaw might be a good idea. So anyway, let me share my screen, and I'll just go through the process of how I do this. And let's get rid of that. And this is just a video I shot, and it's all about process here. You can see me pulling cylinders off the wall here. And like I really do a bunch of these at one time, usually around Christmas for gifts. And I sell these, of course. Put it between centers. I'm going to make myself a little bigger there, a little too big. Okay, that'll be better. Okay. So, uh, inch and a quarter spindle gouge, standard issue. Uh, Round up the cylinder, peel off all that green wood sealer. I keep it as large as I can. Now here's a beating chisel. also known as a parting tool, 3/8 of an inch. I'll use this to put a tenon on both sides. Now I'm going to chuck it up. The base side, or no, actually the lid side is in the chuck because we're going to part it off. We're going to part off the lid. Now, marking, I say 1/4 to 1/5 of the length of the mill is going to be parted. I say probably 1/5 is best. And then right at the last bit here, I take a saw and I cut it off just for safety. You don't want to pinch it off. There you go. Now let's put the head of the mill in the chuck. And this particular mechanism is going to need a 5/16 drill bit. We're going to throw that all the way through the head. I haven't really discussed mechanisms, but we'll get to that point. The mechanisms that are sold today are superior to where we were 20 years ago. And I showed you this big mill that I found at a thrift store. I'm going to take the mechanism out of this because it's a pretty good quality and then use it for my own personal mechanism or my personal pepper mill. I'm also going to mark here where these two line up because it's easy to make a mistake and put the base with the head and vice versa. So just not going to make that mistake. Put a tenon now on the top of the base. Use a 1-inch spade bit or whatever 1-inch diameter drill you have and push that right through the whole base. That would be typically what you would do when you were making a pepper mill anyway. I'm going to hollow mine out and get a much bigger form. Here I am just lining up all the ones I'm going to do. Now I'm going to make the measurement here of the chuck closed because we're going to use a recess on the bottom of our mill because we have to use that recess so the mechanism will clear. And you'll see as I work here, just to show you different techniques, I'm going to be shifting back and forth with different types of wood. Here's your 1/2-inch spindle gouge to open up our recess. Now, going in to make my dovetail. Probably the depth of this recess is about 3/8 to 1/2. You definitely don't want that mechanism to ever be proud because your mill will never lay flat, and that would never be good. Okay, this is a bottom feeder bowl gouge, and what this tool, look at the pigtails that come off of this cut. It's such a clean cut, just lays down the wood uh, like a mirror, so you don't do a lot of sanding here. Now, this is a negative rake scraper, and I'm going to overemphasize this point. You're right into the teeth of the end grain here. So I'm using a negative rake scraper. It's that beading chisel that I showed you earlier, and I've got a burr on top. And I think right after this, I'm going to use a skew, and this particular skew is one of those Craftsman skews. It's a high carbon steel Craftsman skew, and I'm putting a burr on that top edge. And you'll see that I put my finger over that to fill the burr. Then I'm going to go right after that same cut in a different type of wood. And this hopefully will lay that end grain fiber down very smoothly because it's really difficult to do good sanding here. So you want all this wood to be cut as clean as possible. Now here is the grinding mechanism for our mill. I'm going to cut a hole in the bottom here that makes it slightly sloppy, but not real sloppy. You want it to fit in there nicely without having any friction, because if it's tight to go in, you could split the wood over time because wood will move over time, no matter how dry or wet it is. There it is. That fits in there nicely. Just kind of sloppy. That'll work. Now I'm going to sand up this whole area. Let's go ahead and speed this up. You don't need me you don't need to see me sand particularly, but I'll sand this all the way up to um, the same grit as the exterior. Now I'm going to shape the mill a little bit here, kind of get the feel of the design. Um, Looking back at this particular mill, it kind of looks like a milk jug, and it isn't the prettiest of urns, but it's okay. I've made better ones since, for sure, and I get better every time I make one. Using my spindle gouge, kind of making a shape, making sure here that I don't get um, too thin here. You want to make sure that you're not too thin there because you need strength because we're going to hollow this whole surface out here. And I'll put a few little designs on it, depending on how pretty the wood is. The wood's real pretty. I'll keep it real simple. Now, this is a Kelton hollower. No, I'm going to slow that down here. Let's go back. There it is. So this is a Kelton hollower, half inch, and this is the hook version of that. This is what's going to allow me to hollow out the base of the pepper mill. And this is how I sharpen it, just with a little card file. I think that's 180 grit card file. Now I'm going to open this up. I'll leave this area here about 1/8 of an inch right there. That's all you need. And then hollow about maybe 2/3 all the way up. That's all you would need to do because we're going to hollow from the other side as well. And you don't want to go maybe more than 1/4 inch for wall thickness. It doesn't really need to be all that thin. Anything you do to open up the orifice here is going to give you a lot more volume than just a drilled out hole. Now, I've hollowed out 2/3 all the way up. Let's flip it around now. Now I will go for my final shape and then we'll hollow from the top. You can see the shape coming into play. Back to my 1/2 inch spindle gouge. Now, I think we should probably stop here and talk about the neck of the mill. Let's, I would say that this section here should never be larger than 1 3/4 inches. So think about that. You gotta get a hand around that neck for ease of use. So that's important. Go ahead and start us back up. Just cleaning up these little details that I made with a little beading chisel. Acts like a skew in this scenario. When you put details in your work, you got to make sure everything's crisp and clean. Now I'm right here at the top of the mill. Now I can open this up fairly large as long as I have wood on the sides because you're going to size the head up later. Going to make sure that wall is 90 degrees straight back. That's my beating chisel again. Now, here's my Kelton hollower again. Kelton is a generic name for Kel McNaughton, who makes these tools, but Craft Supplies, I think Rockler sells them, a bunch of others. Just a very simple hollower. And now I've pretty much made the base. It's all hollowed out. Um, I could draw on the image that you're looking at, but just be rest assured that it's hollow. It's not museum quality hollow, but again, it's opened up nicely. No one will ever see the interior here. You can put your finger in there and feel around, and that's where I left it. I'll sand all the way to 400 grit here. That's our base. All right, so let's set ourselves up to make our lid or the top of our pepper mill. Make that measurement there because that's what's going, our head's going to slide in there. So you're going to make a little tenon for that. This chucking up the top of the mill there. Now I'm going to make that fit into the base. And this fit is going to be sloppy. It's not going to have any tension on it. It's just going to be pretty much the exact size of that hole without any restriction. Fit that in there, make sure it slides nicely. That's it. Now, this is the next part of our mill. It's the mechanism. It's the little washer that keeps the metal bar that slides through the mill from twisting. And notice what I'm doing here. I'm cutting a recess for it. Most mills would have it just screwed onto a tenon surface. This is going to make a nice detail. Now, I'm going to shape the head here. And I've learned through experience a couple little things that I can't really show you from this image. But no matter what, I could redo it later, but we're going to jam chuck this in to finish it off, which is always easy to make changes. But here's our negative rake scraper. I'm going to cut that nice and clean. You notice I left the washer in the recess there. It's just because it fit in there nicely and I just kept it there. Now I'm going to sand all this surface because it's an area that I'm not going to be able to get to in the jam chuck. But if I really don't like the shape of the head that I make, I can always make adjustments later. Now, I use a little waste block here to cut a female groove in here to jam the head into. This is side grain, by the way. That's why I'm cutting in this direction. That's the size I need. This will be a tension fit. It's really nice when these chunks of wood here are green, and I believe this one is green. Make that recess in there and then jam the head into a wet piece of wood and it really holds tight. And if you're not used to making this type of chuck, you should really get into it because in order to be versatile in your turning, you're going to need this technique that I'm showing you here. Jam that right into the orifice. Now I have access to this whole head. There it is. I'm going to show you the overhead view. Put the tailstock up, I believe here. Yeah, and now I'm guaranteed that it won't fall out. I'm just going to make a teardrop shaped head. And that's, again, very simple. You can see that the wood has a lot of figure. It doesn't need to be overdone with grooves or staining or burn marks or whatever. I'm going to keep it all very simple. You can see I'm just got a very simple bead going into a cove, kind of a temple look. All right, and that's our finished head. I'll put them together here and get myself out of the way. Yeah, it's good looking. Not great, but it's good. Now I'm going to put the mechanism together, all the parts. Going to sign it. I think that's important. Notice there's no finish on this yet, but I'm going to drill the holes and then pull it all apart and then finish it and then put it back together. Now, we haven't talked about the length of the mechanism. So what I've done here is I've got, um, let's go ahead and go a little fast forward here. Okay. So I didn't try to size the mill up to the length of the mechanism. That would not have been a good idea. This, I use any chunk of wood and then make the mechanism fit what I made instead of the other way around. Because a lot of times when you're not experienced enough to make a pepper mill, you'll get an 8-inch long mechanism and you'll get an 8-inch long piece of wood, and then you're going to be really stressed to make sure that the design you made is going to fit in that 8-inch length. What I've done here is thrown that out the window, make the mechanism fit for you. So what I've done here, let's go ahead and get it going again. I'm going to make a mark for the length that I need to cut. So I'm going to cut that right here on my vise. And you notice the end is peened. We're going to peen the end. And I use a hammer, this type of hammer. You could use a peening hammer, which would be ideal. I don't know why I didn't use one here, but I just mushroom over that end. Now I've got a mechanism bar that will actually work. Let's stop and look at what I'm doing here. I'm going to make myself smaller. That blue can there is mineral spirits, odorless mineral spirits. I've mixed it with polyurethane, gloss polyurethane. And now I'm mopping on the finish. So I've got 10% odorless mineral spirits with polyurethane, and that's going to give me a wipe on poly. It's going to give me longer working times. Notice I have gloves on. I'm mopping the polyurethane on with a paper towel, and I'm just going to saturate it. Let's keep on going here because this is important. I'll do this probably 3 or 4 times. And I gave you a couple different options of how to do this. Now I'm going to take fresh, dry paper towels and I mopped on all the finish, then I'm going to wipe it right off. Very important to do this, do it right. Because, personally, I don't like the look of polyurethane laid down into a film. It looks like plastic, and I don't want my work to look like plastic. So this is how I keep it looking like wood. So wipe on, wipe off. No drips, nothing else. Now look what I done. I just kind of had an advertisement there, and it was meant to be. Liberon. The Germans, Klingspor also makes a very high quality steel wool. I would only buy it from those two companies unless you know of a high quality 4/0 steel wool. They're hard to find, and Liberon and Klingspor make an excellent one. Yeah, I would say that it's really important, or you can use a synthetic. I just like the steel wool parts. And now all these have been coated with one coat of the varnish that we put on earlier, and I'm etching the surface with steel wool. You can also etch the surface between centers on your lathe, just kind of buff that wool over the polyurethane, and then now you could recoat it because you have to etch that surface. Otherwise, the polyurethane won't stick to it and it'll cause a problem in the future. Same thing, you can put the head on the lathe and buff it with the steel wool. Not a bad idea here because you get the skill to make jam chucks. Now, okay, we've pretty much finished all that. And so I that would be the total finish there. And I might buff it with a paper towel, and that would be good. No wax, no nothing. If you put wax on it, you're going to get water spots. So that's the finish, believe it or not. 3 or 4 coats, polyurethane blended with mineral spirits. Now we have the mechanism or the whole mill done. So let me stop share here real quick. We have the whole mill done, but we typically would have had a chromium piece that it's kind of uh, a cheap piece of steel that's been coated. And what I've done is I'm going to make a wooden version of that. And inside that hole there is that chromium piece. And I've cut it down to 10 millimeters on my lathe. And I'm going to show you how I did that. Then I drilled a hole into that African blackwood piece to denote pepper. And I'll use a light colored wood to denote salt if I made a salt mill like that. And that's kind of a nice touch. Again, an heirloom touch. So let's go ahead and share again the screen. And this is how I've done it. I've taken a thread piece that I found on a metal screw, and I put it into a Jacob's chuck, tighten that up. Make myself bigger again here. Move that. Yeah, so it threads right onto that. Then I'll take a parting chisel and cut that into a stud. Just like that. And I think what you find under the coating here is a piece of brass, and that turns really nice. It's easy to cut. Just measuring that 10 millimeters. There you go. That's all we need. Now here's a piece of African blackwood. It's a true de Bergia. It's a almost jet black when it's finished. It's 10 millimeter bit. I'm going to glue that in with some epoxy. And then I can have access to turn a nice little fitted lid that's not chromium. You get the idea. I could probably speed that up a bit. I've settled on more of a teardrop shape for these heads. This one's is kind of just a simple knob. Then I sand it up, 600 grit, good to go. Let's slow that up. And these are this pepper mill here that you see on the that I'm actually screwing to. This is a relatively common wood, and you wouldn't believe it. In Australia it's called beef wood. It's a it it is a it is a grevillea, and grevilleas grow all over California, and they look like pine trees, but they're big hardwood trees. That's also called ironwood in a lot of places, but just a gorgeous timber, really heavy, but pretty. Yeah, you can see samples. You can see the chromium part there. Whoops. There's the chromium part that came with the mechanism. Now, a discussion about mechanisms. Obviously, you're out there looking at this going, well, what about this type of mechanism? What about the French mechanisms? What's better? Like I said, the every mechanism that you find now is pretty darn good. And like I said, 25 years ago, they weren't. Um, I know craft supplies had gone to Asia to have these made, and the quality of them is just excellent nowadays. I don't think you can go wrong with any mechanism that you get. Um, and I think I show a gallery of other mills here as we go. I'm not sure, but yeah, there we go. That's that Grevillea piece that I was talking about. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. It's um, something unique to make, an heirloom. We refer to it as an heirloom because we want, um, when we make things, we hope that they will be cherished and live long. And the way I've done it here today, using good quality wood, good quality finish, good quality mechanism, should make a nice family heirloom. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you later.